and we're going to kick things off here. The only way that I think Lions fans want to hear right now, because
the Kool-Aid.
We are going to start off the first segment here just chugging all the Kool-Aid we possibly can. We might a little bit later knock us down to reality a little bit, and then I'm excited about the last segment too, because we are going to talk predictions. So you guys are going to have to stick around to the end for that part. But who wants to kick off the Kool-Aid?
I was going to say I stole a little soapbox to start, but once we get back to the end of the podcast, everyone gets their soapbox at the end to rally the troops.
That's right.
Make their predictions. Yes. So let's start in the Kool-Aid. I don't want to take. I just did. I need to rest my chords for a second. So Jeremy, Ryan, whichever one of you wants to start on reasons for optimism. We're dividing it between optimism and pessimism as we look down here. If you checked out our 53-man roster, we dropped it over the weekend. Let's talk though about optimism for the season.
Well, Ryan, I'm Mr. Wet Blanket over here, so I need you to kick things off with the optimism.
Yeah, I think that there's an easy reason that staring everybody in the face as to why you should be optimistic for the Detroit Lions this season, and it's because there very well might be a pass rush in Detroit. There very well may be two dudes who can get into the backfield and cause some havoc on just about any given play. Doesn't matter if it's first or second down and it's Charles Harris out on the edge. Doesn't matter if it's Aiden Hutchinson kicking inside as a 3-tech and generating some push from the middle to hopefully free up another guy who's coming through, because I know this team isn't going to be afraid so much to blitz. I think that they're going to be a team that's going to want to get after the quarterback because they do have the luxury of having a couple of guys, specifically Charles Harris and Aiden Hutchinson, that's going to generate a pass rush. And Chris and I have joked about it for years and years and years. We've talked about pass rushers blue in the face, man.
Literally since the first podcast.
I mean, it was just a year after year. It was names that were there but gone. Harold Landry. It was, all of these guys that the Lions could have taken a chance on. And finally they did this year. And I think they got it right. And I think that there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about not just who Aiden Hutchinson is as a football player in his rookie season, but the dynamic and the dimension that he's going to bring to the team when we know that pass rush is king in the NFL.
Yeah. And I mean, finally they have more than one option, right? That's the keys. Like, we had Ziggy for a while and he was good. We had Romeo Okwara. He was pretty good for a year.
Charles Harris was really good last year, right?
But now the Lions are going to have guys that are going to have one-on-ones, and we know that they're capable of winning their one-on-ones. And that, to me, is what's so key about the pass rush this year. And I wish the interior defensive line was a little stronger. I wish they were a little bit healthier, because that would help out too. But Ali McNeil is a dude. Michael Brockers is – I don't think Michael Brockers is going to have a big year, but he knows how to play this game, and he knows how to win one-on-ones when he has to. So I'm with you. I think that's a huge reason for optimism, and especially where you need one on that defensive side of the ball, because that was the weakest last year and probably still the weakest unit this year.
You mentioned Ezekiel Ansah. You say he's good. He was okay. Charles Harris was good for a little bit, as you said. Romeo Okwara, good for a little bit. The thing with Hutchinson is, and I feel like sometimes we keep forgetting Hutchinson is there because Malcolm Rodriguez stole all the preseason hype. He stole all the training camp hype. Everyone was very excited on draft night for the surprise get of Jamison Williams, and everyone likes a good, wide receiver. There's a lot of good stories deeper into the draft the Lions had that we just all kind of forgot. Hey, Aiden Hutchinson is right here. And the potential for Aiden Hutchinson is it's not just that he could be good, but he's got the pedigree that he could be elite at some point. I think he'll be unpolished for his rookie year. I think he will play with a violence that will get him. Sometimes he'll overshoot sometimes, but it'll be fun to watch. And it will be something that teams have to game plan for a guy who's a rookie. Because again, they've got to worry about that missile coming off their edge, while at the same time, they've got to have Okwara or Charles Harris to worry about on the other side. Maybe even Austin Bryant sometimes.
Well, yeah, and that's the point too, is like, it's not a bad bench of guys right now. Like, Austin Bryant had a really good preseason. I still question whether that's going to translate to the regular season, but Julian Okwara is a guy, we unfortunately we haven't really seen him in a month due to injury, but it sounds like he's at least tracking towards potentially being ready for week 1. And then once the rest of the crew gets healthy, I mean, we're talking about Josh Paschal, a guy who can kick it inside and maybe bring some of that interior pass rush. We're talking about Romeo Okwara, a guy who's going to be chomping at the bit to be out there. And when he was out there, he fits exactly what this Lions team is going to do. So again, it's depth. It's having more than one guy that can win. And when you do that, you put a heck of a lot of pressure on the opposing offensive line.
Let's talk about one more element of the team that I'm very excited for. And I think, Ryan, I'll kick this ball right over to you to start. Let's compare the wide receiver room this year versus last year, where Khalif Raymond, who is still on the roster and he's still fine, he was probably the top option out of the gate there because of what happened with Quintez Cephas. Now suddenly Amon-Ra St. Brown gets a second year. Suddenly Jared Goff looks more comfortable with a lot of these receivers. Suddenly DJ Shark's on the roster. Suddenly this offense looks very dynamic for its skill positions and for its offensive line.
Yeah, I don't. Here's the thing. I think that the same thing with the pass rush can be said about the wide receivers, in that the pass rush looks promising now, but it can grow so much if guys like Paschal get healthy. If we do see Romeo Okwara this year. So there's this element of like, man, it can be even greater if like the Lions, come up aces on some of these things. When it comes to wide receivers, Jameson Williams is waiting in the wings. Like, as you mentioned, Chris, Khalif Raymond, now he's settled into a more comfortable spot for what his skill set, can provide. He's not going to be counted on to be the number one guy outside the numbers. Like, they can use Khalif Raymond like the kind of gadget player that a team who is in the right spot to have those guys in their depth chart. Like, that's who Khalif Raymond is. So like, I totally agree. I think if there was one thing that I'm so optimistic about, it's the pass catchers in Detroit. And I mean, I think it's totally fair to just lump in TJ Hawkinson in with that group too, because the weapons are just aplenty, Jeremy. Like, we don't want to say that Jared Goff maybe has every piece that he had as he did when he was with the Rams and had a career season. But I mean, like, Brad Holmes has done his darndest, right, to fill things out around Jared Goff.
For sure. And I think you bring up a really good point, pointing to Khalif Raymond as the example here, because it feels like last year the plan was just like, we're going to see how versatile not just wide receivers, everyone. We had corners playing safeties playing corners, nickels playing outside. Like, the Lions had to scramble because of injuries, because of just a lack of depth. Now they finally have guys playing in the positions that they should be playing in. They have two outside receivers who are speedy. They have Amon-Ra that's going to be in the nickel in the slot most of the time. While they have Khalif Raymond as a backup who can do all those things. Quintez Cephas, a guy who can do all of those things. In terms of just the depth, I think wide receiver, again, just so much more filled out than it was last year, and with people in the right places. And I think that's the most important part. And listen, they're going to be interchangeable. We'll see, Chark in the slot sometimes. We'll see Josh Reynolds. Like, Josh Reynolds, again, a guy we haven't really talked that much about, and one that I think we need to like pay a little bit more attention to, not just because he was part of the reason that the offense opened up last year, but I heard Dan Campbell on a Zoom with some season ticket holders said, who was the most improved person this offseason? Josh freaking Reynolds. He's a guy that I think people are sleeping on, and I know he's probably the first one to the bench once J-Mo comes back, and I know we're all eager for J-Mo to come back, but don't sleep on Josh Reynolds being a big factor early on in the season.
Let me tell you another factor that's going to be great early on in the season too. I think the schedule is favorable to the Detroit Lions. The Lions pulled the NFC East. They've pulled the Seattle Seahawks. We talked about this in the schedule release. We feel like their toughest games probably going to come on Thanksgiving against the Bills and after the bye with the Dallas Cowboys. And to be honest, a lot of people are starting to sell on the Cowboys for the season too. Like, maybe more people buying on the Patriots than the Cowboys, but even then, I can't help but laugh at what's happening with. Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that Patriots game looks a lot more winnable than it did a month ago.
Yeah. Especially Matt Patricia is still splitting time with Joe Judge in some god effing timeshare. Like, suddenly this schedule looks favorable to the Lions. I am struggling to bring my feet back down to the earth, especially when we had to do our win totals for the season. But man, you get to start with the Philadelphia Eagles. It's tough out of the gate. That's not an easy team. But after that, Commanders, come on. The Vikings, okay, they could be a little tough. But then Seahawks, Patriots, a bye, Cowboys, Dolphins, who knows what they are? Like, you'll get the Giants and the Jaguars later in the year. You'll get the Jets and the Panthers. Like, Ryan, I feel like this schedule, there's not a lot of like, there's usually a strength spot every year in the NFL schedule for the Lions where it's like, oh my God, that stretch is brutal, or oh my God, the bye is too early. There's nothing really out of place or unfavorable in the schedule right now for the Detroit Lions, in my book. And that gives me a huge amount of optimism.
It should. And I think that it's just kind of trended in that way too, though, right? Like, even the odds, I think the odds opened up with the Eagles being bigger favorites than they are now. Like, I know that was one of the things that we even talked about the schedule as a whole. Like, the Lions, the odds came out and like they were underdogs in like just about every single game that they were playing, whether they were home or away. And I don't know, like, but we've talked about these things as things of optimism and things to be optimistic about, but like, it's just so weird where this energy is coming from. Like, what is it? Hard Knocks? Like, is that pumping into it? Is the fact that this team looks just so far, head and shoulders above where they were a year ago, Jeremy? Like, I mean, you were there at training camp last season and you saw what the offense like was able to do. I like probably more aptly described as the few things that they could maybe stumble into achieving. Like, right. It was bad. It was terrible. Like, Rashad Perryman was going to be a starting wide receiver. And now he's not going to be on this football team. Like, I don't know. I just think like it's just strange to think about where all of this energy and optimism is coming from.
I think Hard Knocks has a little bit to do with it, but I mean, we had national people talking about the Detroit Lions before that even started, right? Yeah. Like, Mina Kimes started the hype train. And I think Dan Campbell plays a big part of that. Like, he's a great rah-rah guy, but there's legitimate reasons too, right? Like, the fact that they went heavy on defense in this draft, and the Lions are going to get at least one or two guys that are going to contribute right away on that side of the ball. They've invested in youth everywhere, so they're expecting a guy like Jeff Okudah, another guy who we're kind of high on right now after a good training camp performance, and Derek Barnes is another one that we're kind of high on, and we're hoping if Fatu Melifonwu gets healthy and maybe he adds something to the safety position. This is what happens when you build young, right? Is that suddenly you're expecting your guys to get better. When you have a coaching staff right now that seems to be doing everything right, those young players progress even more. So it's just, when you have a youthful roster, and this is either the youngest or the second youngest, depending on what measure you use. Yeah. That hope. That's young players equals hope. And I think that's kind of driving the machine here right now.
I agree with you, but like, they were a young team last year too. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It just feels like there's going to be a step that's going to be taken.
Yeah.
I know we're all going to do predictions later, and it's just going to be so interesting to hear, I think, your guys' perspective against mine, and like, well, how big of a step is it going to be? That's the question, right?
Yeah. I mean, before we get into anything else, we have to talk about the offensive line, right? Like, I know we talked a little bit about the offense, but the offensive line is really, I think, like, I'd have to throw it back to car talk because I don't the engine that stirs the car.
Motor,
I don't know.
The motor stirs the car.
Stirs the drink. That
is a bad thing to be stirred. But I almost feel like the offensive line doesn't even need to be mentioned at this point, because man, like, that's been a strength for a minute, but now we get to see all five of these guys starting at the same time. Jonah Jackson,
we gotta cross our fingers and knock on wood, because at this
point,
is
why I didn't want to talk about it.
We were saying at this point last year, it looked like all five were going to start to begin the season, and then in the middle of practice of week 1, Taylor Decker hurts his hand. So fingers crossed, 7 more days, wrap those guys in bubble wrap. We're going to finally see these guys in the regular season.
All right, one more point for optimism from any of you guys. What else you got?
Well, if I can just follow up a little bit about the offensive line, like, I feel very confident about like the Lions' interior offensive line making a huge improvement for the run game. Like I think that there's a legitimate reason to think that Deuce Staley can get the most out of this running back group. And I really think that the Lions are going to be able to kick it back to car talk, right? They're going to establish it, man. I think that they're going to establish the run. Like it's part of their identity, but it's also, here's the thing. Last year, it was part of their identity. They wanted to run the ball because it was Dan Campbell and it was hard nosed and it was going to be, we're going to impose our will on you. But now it feels like the personnel's going to match it. Now it feels like the personnel's Frank's healthy. Jonah, like I feel like Vitai's just a road grader. Like that's just what he's gonna do, and they're gonna play to the strengths of those guys. Like, yes, I can't wait to see DeAndre Swift out in space when Penei Sewell is out there blocking like a 330-pound tight end.
Yeah.
Like it's insane. And I think I just think that that's where the Lions can make one of their biggest improvements from last year to this year is being able to run the football and to control the clock a little bit. And they have the personnel to do it now.
And I think it's going to matter in the passing game just as much because when Taylor Decker came back halfway through the season, like I feel like that gets lost in all the reasons the offense turned around because Dan Campbell took over play calling and Josh Reynolds came back. I think Taylor Decker giving Jared Goff more time was huge. And so if we can get a full season out of him and Penei Sewell, who, let's not kid ourselves, like he's going to be even better this year. And pass protection was maybe his weak point. He's going to be a lot better in that this year. And so having two rock solid tackles is going to do wonders for this passing game. If this offense is finally going to open up the deep ball like we've been promised and we've seen some flashes of in training camp, and they were better last year, but we didn't really see this truly be an explosive down the field offense last year at all. If it is, you need good tackle play, and the Lions have it for the first time, hopefully for an entire season this year.